No one at Magnolia Grand Hotel noticed the woman carrying a folded white swan napkin through the wedding reception, except the elderly owner watching quietly from the far end of the ballroom. Inside that perfectly folded linen rested something small that had once symbolized forever. Just a few feet away, Kelly Stewart watched her ex-husband Robert raise a champagne glass beside his new bride, smiling as if an entirely different life had begun. Kelly placed the swan gently on his table, turned without a single tear, and disappeared into the kitchen. Before the night was over, that silent gesture would change far more than one marriage's ending. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. And if heartfelt stories about dignity, second chances, and quiet courage speak to you, consider subscribing so we can share many more journeys together. At exactly 4:30 every morning, long before Charleston's historic streets welcomed tourists and horse-drawn carriages, Kelly Stewart's alarm chimed with the same soft piano melody she had used for nearly 10 years. She never hit snooze. Some habits were not born from discipline alone. They were born from necessity. The small duplex she shared with her father sat on a quiet street shaded by ancient live oaks. The house was old enough to groan whenever the weather changed, but Kelly kept every corner spotless. Fresh flowers from the tiny backyard often rested beside family photographs, even if they were nothing more than wild daisies she had picked on her way home. She walked quietly down the hallway, careful not to wake Harold too suddenly. Parkinson's had made mornings unpredictable. Some days his hands barely trembled. Other days he couldn't button his own shirt without help. She knocked gently before entering his room. "Morning, Dad." Harold Stewart looked up with sleepy eyes and smiled. "You're up before the birds again." "They're getting lazy," he chuckled. "I raised a hard-working daughter." "You raised a stubborn one." That answer always made him laugh. Kelly helped him sit up slowly before placing his medication organizer on the bedside table. Every compartment had been labeled by day and hour with careful handwriting. She watched his fingers closely as he reached for the pills. The trembling was mild today. "That's better," she whispered. "What?" "Your hands. They still listen to me, most mornings?" Kelly smiled, but the worry behind her eyes never disappeared. While Harold dressed himself at his own pace, Kelly moved into the kitchen. Coffee, oatmeal with cinnamon, 2 scrambled eggs, 1 slice of wheat toast cut diagonally because her father insisted it somehow tasted better that way. By 5:10, breakfast was ready. They ate together every morning without exception. Outside the kitchen window, dawn slowly painted the Charleston sky with pale shades of gold and lavender. Harold broke the comfortable silence first. "Big wedding today?" Kelly nodded while pouring more coffee. "The biggest one this month." "Busy?" "Very." "You'll be tired." "I've been tired before." He watched her for a moment. "You always say that." "And it's always true." Neither mentioned the stack of medical bills tucked beneath a fruit bowl on the counter. Neither mentioned the pharmacy receipt waiting to be paid. Neither mentioned the extra $420 she would receive if she completed every shift that weekend without missing a single hour. Some conversations were too familiar to need words. At 5:45, Kelly picked up her lunch. It was packed inside the same faded blue lunchbox she had carried for years. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, a reusable bottle of water. Nothing expensive, nothing wasted. Before leaving, she bent down and adjusted Harold's jacket collar. "You have enough soup." "I do." "George will stop by this afternoon." "I know." "You'll call me if you need anything." "I always do." Harold reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, folded white napkin. It had been carefully shaped into a tiny swan. He placed it in her hand. "You forgot this yesterday." Kelly laughed softly. "I wondered where it went." "You've been making these since your mother taught you." "I guess I have." "Still believe they bring people comfort." Kelly looked at the delicate folds. I think people notice kindness more than perfection. Harold nodded. Your mother believed that too. Kelly slipped the little swan into her lunchbox before walking outside. Her silver Chevrolet Malibu had over 200,000 miles on it. The paint had faded under years of southern sun, and the air conditioner worked only when it felt generous. She patted the dashboard once before turning the key. Come on, old girl. The engine hesitated. Then it started. That's my girl. The drive into downtown Charleston took 25 minutes. As Magnolia Grand Hotel appeared at the end of Meeting Street, its elegant brick facade caught the first rays of sunlight. Flower boxes overflowed beneath tall windows. Guests would later admire crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, never imagining the endless work hidden behind swinging kitchen doors. Kelly entered through the employee entrance. The familiar sounds welcomed her immediately. Rolling carts, running water, metal trays, voices calling food orders, industrial dishwashers already humming. Marcus Reed looked up from a prep station. Morning, Kelly. Morning. You beat me again. I usually do. He shook his head. One day I'm going to get here before you. You've been saying that for 3 years. And one day it'll happen. Kelly smiled as she tied on her gray apron. She checked every sink, organized every rack, counted every tray. Everything had its place. Everything always did. Across the room, a young woman struggled to unfold a bundle of white linen. Kelly walked over. Need a hand? Sophie Miller looked relieved. Please. Kelly showed her how to smooth each napkin without stretching the fabric. I keep wrinkling them. They don't need force. So what's the trick? Kelly folded one slowly, one corner, then another. A gentle turn. The neck, finally the curved wings. Within seconds, a graceful swan rested in her palms. Sophie's eyes widened. That's beautiful. My mom taught me. Why swans? Kelly looked at the finished napkin for a long moment before answering. She used to tell me something every time we prepared for a wedding. What was it? Kelly carefully placed the swan at the center of the banquet table. People may forget the meal. She lightly adjusted its wings. But they'll always remember how you made them feel welcome. Sophie repeated the sentence quietly, almost to herself. I like that. It isn't about folding napkins. No. It's about reminding yourself that every guest deserves dignity, even if they never notice the person who prepared the table. Those words stayed with Sophie long after Kelly returned to the dish station. For the next several hours, Kelly worked with the quiet rhythm that had earned everyone's respect. Stacks of china disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Glasses sparkled. Silverware lined up perfectly. No movement was wasted. No complaint escaped her lips. Guests would never know her name. Most of them would never even see her face. But every polished plate they touched had first passed through Kelly Stewart's careful hands. She believed invisible work still mattered. She had no idea that before the day was over, the invisible life she had spent years building in silence was about to collide with the one she thought she had left behind forever. By late Tuesday morning, Magnolia Grand Hotel had begun its familiar transformation. The ballroom that had hosted a corporate breakfast only hours earlier was slowly becoming something entirely different. White linen replaced conference tables. Crystal centerpieces arrived in carefully padded boxes. Florists carried in armfuls of ivory roses, eucalyptus, and magnolia blossoms. Every corner seemed to breathe anticipation. For the events team, another wedding meant another demanding schedule. For Kelly Stewart, it was still just another shift, or at least that's what she believed. Marcus wheeled a cart loaded with serving trays past the dish station. They're expecting almost 200 guests this Saturday. Kelly glanced at the stack. That's manageable. You always say that. It usually is. Marcus grinned. You make impossible sound ordinary. Before Kelly could answer Denise, the event coordinator hurried into the kitchen, carrying a thick wedding binder. Everyone, quick reminder. Several staff members gathered around. Ceremony starts at 5:30, cocktail hour at 6. Dinner service begins exactly at 7. Timing can't slip even 5 minutes. She flipped through several pages. The Stewart Carter wedding has a detailed schedule. Kelly froze. Only for half a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Marcus did. Denise continued reading. The groom is Robert Stewart. Kelly's fingers tightened around the ceramic plate she was drying. And the bride is Emily Carter. The words seemed to echo long after Denise walked away. Robert Stewart. There were thousands of people with that last name. She told herself not to assume. Not yet. She quietly returned to polishing dishes. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe Charleston had another Robert Stewart marrying this weekend. Maybe life wasn't that cruel. Half an hour later, Sophie hurried into the dish room carrying a stack of printed seating charts. Marcus, where should these go? Leave them here. Several sheets slipped from her hands and scattered across the stainless steel counter. Kelly instinctively bent to help gather them. Her eyes landed on the first page. Robert James Stewart. Emily Grace Carter. Wedding reception, Magnolia Grand Ballroom. Saturday, 6:00 p.m. Everything around her suddenly became strangely quiet. The voices, the clatter of dishes, the humming machines. For one impossible moment she heard nothing except the memory of another voice. I promise you, Kelly, no matter where life takes us, we'll always celebrate our anniversaries together. She remembered standing beneath a small oak tree 13 years earlier. A borrowed wedding dress, homemade cupcakes instead of an expensive cake, friends laughing beneath strings of lights, Robert slipping a simple ring onto her finger. Neither of them owned much. Neither of them cared. Back then, a plate slipped from Kelly's hands. It struck the rubber floor mat with a dull sound, but didn't break. Sophie looked over immediately. Are you okay? Kelly bent down before anyone else could. I'm fine. You look pale. Just skipped enough water this morning? It wasn't a convincing answer. Marcus waited until Sophie left before speaking quietly. Kelly. She didn't respond. Is it him? She continued stacking plates with mechanical precision. Finally, she nodded once. Marcus exhaled slowly. I was afraid of that. She still didn't look up. I didn't know they booked here. I know. After a long silence, Marcus leaned against the counter. You don't have to work this wedding. Kelly gave a faint smile. I actually do. We'll figure something out. She shook her head. If I miss the shift, Marcus already knew. The bonus. $420. For Harold. She nodded. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. I hate that you're even having to choose. It's not really a choice. No, it isn't. For the next hour, Kelly buried herself in work. She scrubbed roasting pans until they reflected the ceiling lights. She organized racks of glasses. She counted silverware twice. The more her hands moved, the quieter her thoughts became. Work had always been her safest place, because dishes never judged. Soap never asked painful questions. Steam hid tears remarkably well. Around lunchtime, Denise appeared again. Kelly. Yes. I need 6 demonstration place settings for the bride this afternoon. No problem. Can you fold your swan napkins? Kelly hesitated, only briefly. Of course. She collected 6 perfectly pressed white napkins. Sophie stood beside her. I've been practicing. Kelly smiled gently. Show me. Sophie's swan leaned awkwardly to one side. Its neck collapsed. Its wings refused to stay open. Kelly chuckled softly. Not bad. It looks like a tired duck. Kelly laughed for the first time all day. It kind of does. She unfolded the cloth. Watch carefully. Her fingers moved with practiced grace. Every fold had a purpose. Every angle mattered. Nothing was rushed. Sophie watched in fascination. You barely even look. My mother always said your hands remember what your heart repeats. Did she work here too? Kelly's movements paused. Yes. Really? For almost 20 years. I never knew. Most people don't. Sophie admired the finished swan. It's beautiful. Kelly carefully placed each completed swan onto silver charger plates. For just a moment, she imagined another younger version of herself watching her mother do the exact same thing in another hotel kitchen. Back then, she had thought elegance belonged only to rich people. Her mother had smiled. No, sweetheart. She had gently adjusted the wings of the little swan. Elegance belongs to anyone who chooses kindness. Kelly blinked away the memory. Marcus returned, carrying another schedule. You still planning to stay Saturday? Kelly didn't answer immediately. She looked around the kitchen, the cooks, the servers, the dishwashers, the housekeepers passing through the hallway. Everyone depended on one another. She had spent nearly 9 years becoming someone this team could count on. She couldn't walk away now. Not because Robert Stewart was getting married. That chapter had already ended. Or at least she wanted to believe it had. I'm staying. Marcus searched her face. You sure? No. She smiled sadly. But I'm staying anyway. Later that afternoon, while transporting clean china toward the ballroom, Kelly passed the framed welcome sign that had just been delivered. Elegant gold lettering shimmered beneath soft lights. Welcome the wedding celebration of Robert and Emily, Saturday, Magnolia Grand Hotel. She stopped walking, only for a heartbeat. Then she reached out. The corner of the frame had collected a tiny fingerprint during setup. Without thinking, Kelly took a cloth from her apron pocket and polished the glass until it shone. When she finished, her own reflection looked back at her beside the names. She stared for one quiet moment. Then she whispered almost too softly to hear. They deserve a beautiful day. Not because it would be easy, not because it wouldn't hurt, but because someone else's happiness did not have to become another reason for bitterness. She straightened the sign, picked up the tray of dishes once more, and continued toward the ballroom, unaware that from the mezzanine above, Eleanor Brooks had watched the entire moment in silence. The elderly owner said nothing. She simply continued observing the quiet dishwasher who had just polished another woman's wedding sign with the same care she gave every guest who walked through Magnolia Grand's doors. Long before Robert Stewart's name appeared on a wedding schedule before Magnolia Grand Hotel became Kelly Stewart's second home, there had been a tiny apartment above an old hardware store on the outskirts of Charleston. The building had thin walls, unreliable plumbing, and windows that rattled whenever coastal storms rolled in. Kelly had loved it. Not because it was beautiful, because it was theirs. The living room had been furnished almost entirely with second-hand finds. Their dining table had once belonged to an elderly neighbor. Their sofa carried a faint scratch from someone else's cat. The coffee maker sputtered every morning before finally cooperating. Every item carried a story. Every corner carried hope. Robert was 28, then ambitious and endlessly optimistic. During the day, he worked as a junior sales representative for a construction supplier. At night, he attended MBA classes, convinced that education would eventually open every door he dreamed about. Kelly believed him. She believed in him even more. After finishing her morning shift at a neighborhood cafe, she cleaned offices 3 evenings each week. On weekends, she accepted catering jobs, birthday parties, church receptions, anything that helped pay tuition. Robert hated watching her leave for another shift. "You don't have to keep doing this," he once told her as she tied her apron. Kelly smiled while adjusting his tie. "You have class tonight." "I can borrow more." "You already borrowed enough." "I'll pay it back." "I know you will." She kissed his forehead before grabbing her keys. "And when you do, we'll finally have weekends together." Back then, she truly believed that dream was only a few years away. Some nights she returned home after midnight. Robert would already be asleep, his textbooks spread across the kitchen table. Kelly quietly covered him with a blanket before washing the dishes left in the sink. She never woke him. She wanted him rested for the future they were building together. One rainy October evening, everything changed. Her phone rang during a catering event. It was the hospital. Linda Brooks had collapsed at work. Kelly drove there still wearing her serving uniform. She found her mother sitting upright in a hospital bed, trying much too hard to smile. "It's probably nothing," Linda insisted. It wasn't. The diagnosis came 2 days later. An aggressive autoimmune disease, months of treatment, frequent hospital visits, no certainty. Kelly never forgot the silence that filled the doctor's office after those words were spoken. Robert reached for her hand. "We'll get through this." And for a while, they did. Kelly reduced her work hours at the cafe and picked up flexible cleaning jobs so she could accompany her mother to appointments. College brochures that had once sat proudly on the kitchen counter disappeared into a drawer. She had planned to study hospitality management. She never submitted the application. One evening, Robert found the unopened envelope. "You never mailed it." Kelly folded another load of laundry before answering. "I can apply next year." "You've been saying that." "My mom needs me." "So do you." She smiled gently. "My future isn't running away." Robert wanted to argue. Instead, he simply hugged her. At that moment, they still believed sacrifices had expiration dates. They didn't know some lasted years. Linda fought bravely. Even on the hardest treatment days, she insisted on folding cloth napkins whenever she visited Kelly. Her fingers had become thinner, slower, but the little white swans always emerged perfectly. "Your folds are too tight," she laughed one afternoon. "They're supposed to stay together. They're supposed to breathe." Kelly frowned. "Napkins breathe," Linda chuckled. "No." She gently opened the swan's wings a little wider. "But people do." Kelly never forgot that lesson. The final Christmas they spent together was quiet. Linda was too weak to stand long enough to cook dinner. So Kelly made soup. Robert hung lights around the tiny apartment. Harold carved the turkey while pretending not to notice his wife's exhaustion. After dinner, Linda handed Kelly a small wooden box. It was handcrafted from polished oak. Inside rested Kelly's wedding ring whenever she wasn't wearing it. "Take care of this," Kelly laughed. "I'm already wearing the ring." "I know," Linda smiled softly. "But one day you'll understand that some things aren't valuable because they're expensive." She touched the box. "They're valuable because they remind us who we chose to be." Less than 4 months later, Linda passed away. The funeral was small, simple, exactly as she had requested. Life moved forward because it had no choice. But something inside their marriage shifted. Kelly became Harold's primary caregiver almost overnight. The strong shipbuilder who had once repaired massive naval vessels now struggled through waves of grief. He forgot meals, stopped sleeping, barely spoke. Kelly stayed. She cooked, cleaned, managed appointments, worked longer hours. Robert graduated near the top of his MBA class. His career advanced quickly. Business dinners replaced homemade meals. Weekend conferences replaced fishing trips with Harold. His suits became more expensive. His phone rang more often. Their apartment slowly filled with nicer furniture, yet somehow felt emptier. One Friday evening, Robert arrived home carrying brochures for luxury condominiums. "We should move." Kelly looked up from sorting Harold's prescription bottles. "We're doing okay here. We've outgrown this place. We've barely been home lately." He sighed. "You always have a reason to stay." "My dad needs me. He could move into assisted living." Kelly looked at him as though she hadn't heard correctly. "He doesn't belong there. He needs professional care. He needs family." Robert rubbed his temples. "And what about us?" Kelly answered quietly. "We are family." The conversation ended there, not because either had won, because neither knew how to bridge the distance growing between them. Months became another year. Robert accepted a promotion requiring constant travel. Kelly accepted more shifts to cover Harold's growing medical expenses. Sometimes they passed each other in the hallway like polite roommates. No screaming, no betrayal, no dramatic accusations. Only two good people walking toward different versions of the future. The evening they finally discussed divorce, rain tapped gently against the apartment windows. Robert sat at the kitchen table for several minutes before speaking. "I don't think I'm the husband you deserve anymore." Kelly looked down at the mug, warming her hands. After a long silence, she asked only one question. "Is there someone else?" Robert answered immediately. "No." She believed him. Because it was true. There wasn't another woman. There was simply another life he wanted more than the one they had built together. Kelly nodded slowly. "I think we've been saying goodbye for a long time." Neither cried. Neither argued over furniture or savings. There wasn't much to divide. The only thing Kelly quietly kept was the small wooden box her mother had given her. Inside rested the wedding ring she removed the night the divorce papers were signed. She never wore it again. She never threw it away either. Not because she hoped Robert would return, but because the ring reminded her of a younger woman who had loved, generously sacrificed, willingly, and believed that kindness was never wasted. Even if the marriage had ended, Kelly refused to believe that the woman she had been was something she needed to forget. She closed the little oak box that night with trembling hands. Years later, as she stood once again inside Magnolia Grand Hotel, preparing for Robert Stewart's wedding, to another woman that same wooden box still waited quietly inside her employee locker, untouched, but never discarded as though it had been waiting for this very week. Saturday arrived wrapped in bright Carolina sunshine. By 7 o'clock that morning, Magnolia Grand Hotel was already humming with the controlled urgency that accompanied every major wedding. Delivery trucks lined the service entrance. Florists hurried through the lobby carrying fresh arrangements of white roses, magnolias, and eucalyptus. Bakers wheeled in a 5-tier wedding cake so carefully that everyone instinctively held their breath as it passed. Guests would not begin arriving for hours. For the staff, however, the day had started long before sunrise. Kelly Stewart tied her gray apron with the same steady movements she repeated every morning. Her locker door remained open behind her, revealing nothing more than a folded cardigan, her faded blue lunchbox, and the small oak box tucked quietly into the back corner. She looked at it only once. Then she closed the locker. Not today, she told herself. There was work to do. Marcus Reed was already reviewing prep lists with the kitchen team. "We're expecting 194 guests." Someone let out a low whistle. Marcus continued. 4-course dinner, 3 dessert stations, champagne tower, no delays. He looked toward Kelly. "Dish room ready." Kelly nodded. "Already organized." "I figured." He smiled before turning back to the others. "Let's give them a wedding they'll remember." Kelly quietly whispered to herself. That's always the goal. By mid-morning, every corner of the hotel seemed alive. Housekeepers polished mirrors one final time. Engineers checked ballroom lighting. Servers rehearsed synchronized plate service. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the hallways before blending with roasted garlic herbs and slow-cooked beef. Inside the dish room, Steam rolled upward in soft white clouds. Kelly moved from station to station with calm efficiency. Every tray found its place. Every stack of china remained perfectly balanced. Every rack of glasses sparkled beneath fluorescent lights. Sophie hurried in carrying another basket of folded linen. "I think I finally made one." Kelly looked down. The swan still leaned slightly to one side. She smiled. "It's better. Still crooked." "Not nearly as much." Sophie laughed. "I don't know how you make them all identical." Kelly adjusted one wing just a fraction. "Don't chase perfection." "What should I chase?" "Care." Sophie frowned. "There's a difference." "A very big one." Kelly placed the swan onto a charger plate. "People can feel when something was prepared with care, even if they never notice it consciously." Sophie looked thoughtfully at the tiny white bird. "I think your mom was pretty wise." Kelly's smile softened. "She was." Just then, a loud voice echoed through the service hallway. "Excuse me?" A middle-aged man wearing an expensive navy suit stood near the ballroom entrance, glaring at one of the banquet servers. "I've asked 3 people already." The young server looked overwhelmed. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll find someone who can help." "I don't want someone." He pointed toward several unopened crates. "I want these moved now." "The ballroom isn't open yet." "I don't care." Kelly happened to be passing with an empty rack. She stopped. "Good morning, sir." The man barely looked at her gray apron. "I've been waiting." "I understand. I specifically requested those family albums be placed beside the gift table." Kelly glanced toward the event schedule. "The decorating team is finishing the stage first." "That's unacceptable." His voice grew louder. "My daughter's wedding starts in a few hours." Several nearby employees exchanged uneasy glances. Kelly remained composed. "I can personally make sure your albums are the next items brought inside once the florists finish." He crossed his arms. "How long?" "About 12 minutes. You know that." "I checked the timeline before answering you." The man studied her for a moment. Most people expected either excuses or defensiveness. Kelly offered neither. Only certainty. Finally, he nodded. 12 minutes. "It'll be done." Exactly 11 minutes later, Kelly wheeled the carefully protected albums into the ballroom herself. The man watched from across the room. "You remembered." Kelly smiled politely. "I said I would." He looked slightly embarrassed. "I suppose I was impatient. It's an important day." "It is. Everyone wants it to be perfect." As Kelly turned to leave, he quietly added, "Thank you." She simply nodded. No lecture, no lingering pride. Just another task completed. From the second-floor balcony overlooking the ballroom, Eleanor Brooks had witnessed the entire exchange. She didn't miss the way Kelly had absorbed someone else's frustration without returning it, nor did she miss the man's expression afterward. People rarely remembered exactly what hotel employees did, but they always remembered how those employees made them feel. Eleanor smiled to herself. Linda Brooks used to do exactly the same thing. Back downstairs, Marcus caught up with Kelly. "What happened with the father of the bride?" "Nothing." "He looked ready to explode." "He was nervous," Marcus laughed. "That's a generous interpretation." "It's his daughter." "So you didn't take it personally?" Kelly shrugged. "If someone's carrying fear, I don't need to carry it too." Marcus stared at her for a second. "You know, I wish everyone in management thought like you." Kelly rinsed another tray. "I'm not management." "No." He looked around the busy kitchen. "But half this place follows your lead anyway." She pretended not to hear him. Just after noon, staff meal was served. Nothing fancy. Chicken and rice. Green beans. Sweet tea. Employees gathered around folding tables in the break room. Conversation drifted between football overtime family and weekend plans. Kelly sat quietly eating her lunch while reading a handwritten reminder tucked beside her sandwich. Dad's neurologist. Monday, 2:15 p.m. She folded the note carefully and slipped it back into the lunchbox. Sophie sat beside her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you always this calm?" Kelly laughed softly. "No." "So, how did you become you?" Kelly thought for a long moment before answering. "My mother used to tell me something." "The welcome quote." Kelly shook her head. "A different one." "What was it?" "When life becomes heavy." Kelly looked toward the busy kitchen where dozens of people hurried in every direction. "Don't become heavier than life." Sophie repeated the sentence quietly. "I don't think I completely understand it." "You will, someday." Before Sophie could ask another question, Denise entered the room. "Everyone." The chatter stopped. "The wedding party has arrived." A ripple of energy moved through the staff. Final uniforms were adjusted. Aprons were straightened. Checklists were reviewed one last time. Kelly picked up her tray and carried it toward the kitchen. As she stepped into the service corridor leading behind the ballroom, she heard laughter echoing through the elegant entrance hall. A man's familiar voice floated through the open doors. It had been years since she had heard it, yet she recognized it instantly. Robert. Kelly stopped walking for only the briefest moment. Her fingers tightened around the empty tray before slowly relaxing again. She took one quiet breath, lifted her chin, and continued toward the dish room. In just a few hours, she would no longer be hearing his voice from a distance. She would see him for the first time since the day they signed their divorce papers. At exactly 5:27 p.m., the ballroom lights dimmed. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured through the tall, arched windows of Magnolia Grand Hotel, bathing the marble floors in warm gold. Somewhere beyond the closed ballroom doors, a string quartet began the opening notes of Canon in D. The ceremony was beginning. Kelly stood in the service hallway with a cart stacked neatly with polished dinner plates. She could not see the bride. She could not see the guests. Only fragments reached her through the partially open doors. Soft applause, laughter, a child whispering too loudly, the quiet clearing of a minister's throat. She adjusted another stack of plates. Marcus approached. "You okay?" Kelly nodded. "I've been better. I can switch someone onto this station." She shook her head. "No. You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not." "Then why stay?" Kelly looked through the narrow gap between the doors. "Because this wedding isn't about me." Marcus wanted to argue. Instead, he simply rested a hand on her shoulder. "If you need 5 minutes, I'll ask." He knew she probably wouldn't. The ceremony lasted just under 30 minutes. During that time, the kitchen operated with unusual quiet. Everyone knew service would become chaotic the moment guests entered for cocktail hour. Servers lined up beside trays of champagne. Bartenders prepared garnishes. Chefs checked temperatures again and again. Kelly inspected every rack coming out of the industrial dishwasher. Each wine glass caught the light perfectly. No fingerprints, no water spots. Nothing less than flawless. As the ballroom doors opened, joyful conversation flooded the hallway. Guests admired the decorations. Music shifted into light jazz. Camera flashes sparkled across the room. Kelly wheeled another cart toward the staging area. For the first time, she could see into the ballroom. Robert Stewart stood near the center, surrounded by smiling relatives. He looked older, not dramatically, just lived in. A few silver strands touched his dark hair. The sharp confidence remained, but there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't existed years ago. He laughed as someone embraced him. Kelly stopped walking. Not because she wanted to, because her feet simply refused another step. This was the man she had once imagined growing old beside, The man whose dreams she had believed were also hers. Now he belonged to another story. Someone behind her spoke quietly. "Kelly." She blinked. Sophie had noticed. "You know him?" Kelly answered honestly. "I used to." Sophie looked toward Robert, then back at Kelly. Realization slowly spread across her face. "Oh." Kelly gave the faintest smile. "It's all right." "No, it's not." Kelly shook her head. "It is now." Before Sophie could respond, Denise hurried over. "Dinner service in 15 minutes." Everyone immediately returned to work. The moment passed. Or at least it appeared to. As guests settled into their seats, Kelly helped arrange the final stacks of serving plates behind the ballroom. She never crossed into the center of the celebration. She remained where she had always worked. Behind the scenes. Invisible. Yet every few minutes she caught brief glimpses through swinging doors. Emily Carter laughing with her bridesmaids. Children running between tables. Grandparents wiping away happy tears. She watched them without resentment, only with a quiet sadness for a life that had once seemed possible. Near the dessert station, Sophie finally gathered enough courage to ask what had been weighing on her mind. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kelly nodded while polishing another tray. "You don't have to answer." "I know." "Why didn't you call in sick today?" Kelly continued working. "I thought about it." "So why didn't you—" She placed another plate onto the rack before answering. "Because someone else would have had to carry my work." "But after everything—" Kelly smiled gently. "Pain doesn't cancel responsibility." Sophie lowered her voice. "I don't think I'd be strong enough." Kelly looked at the young woman. "This isn't strength." "No. It's practice." "Practice." "Getting up every day." "Showing up. Doing what's right even when no one's watching." She paused. "Eventually it becomes part of who you are." Sophie absorbed every word. A few feet away, Eleanor Brooks had entered the service corridor unnoticed while checking the progress of dinner. She heard the final sentence clearly. Then Sophie asked one more question. "If you still loved him," Kelly quietly interrupted. "I didn't come here because I love him." Sophie looked confused. Kelly took a slow breath. "I came because I love the person I promised myself I'd always be." The hallway became very still. Then Kelly added softly, "Responsibility doesn't disappear just because love does." The sentence lingered in the air. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief second. Linda Brooks. She could almost hear Kelly's mother saying those same words in another kitchen decades earlier. Not exactly the same sentence, but the same spirit. Do the work. Honor your word. Leave every place better than you found it. Eleanor quietly walked away without interrupting. She found herself thinking less about the wedding and more about the woman standing behind the service doors. Dinner service began precisely at 7. The ballroom transformed into carefully choreographed movement. Servers emerged from the kitchen carrying synchronized rows of plated entrees, steaks, roasted vegetables, butter-glazed potatoes. Every table received meals within minutes. Kelly never stepped onto the ballroom floor. She remained behind the scenes receiving empty trays almost as quickly as full ones disappeared. Steam clouded the dishroom windows. Water sprayed continuously. Metal clattered against metal. Her hands never stopped moving. Plate, rinse, rack, wash, dry, repeat. At one point, Marcus entered, carrying a stack nearly as tall as himself. "Busy enough for you?" Kelly laughed. "You finally found enough dishes to keep me occupied." "Huh. I figured you wouldn't mind." He placed the stack beside her. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "I've been watching him." "Robert, he hasn't noticed you?" Kelly nodded. "That's probably for the best?" Marcus hesitated. "Maybe." "What?" "I don't think he's avoiding you." "No? I honestly don't think he knows you're here. Kelly looked toward the ballroom entrance. Years ago, that thought might have hurt. Now it simply felt inevitable. People moved on. Lives changed. She had changed too. Just then, another cart rolled into the dish room, overflowing with champagne flutes. Kelly reached for the first glass. The stem slipped slightly in her damp hand. She caught it before it hit the floor. Marcus smiled. Still the fastest hands in Charleston? Kelly looked at the untouched glass sparkling beneath the fluorescent lights. No, she answered almost to herself. They're just steady. Outside the dish room, music swelled as the newlyweds shared their first dance. Inside, Kelly Stewart continued washing the glasses that had celebrated someone else's beginning, never realizing that before the night ended, the quiet dignity she believed no one noticed had already begun changing the course of her own future. By 7:45 p.m., Magnolia Grand Hotel was operating at full speed. The ballroom buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the steady rhythm of live music. Guests toasted the newlyweds, while servers glided between tables with practiced smiles. From the outside, the evening appeared effortless. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, however, every minute depended on precise timing. The first dinner course had been cleared. The second wave of entrees was ready. Dessert preparation had already begun. Kelly barely looked up as another rack of china rolled toward the dish station. "Coming through," Marcus called. She moved instinctively, clearing space before the cart even stopped. "How's the ballroom?" "Happy." "Good." "Kitchen?" "We're surviving." Marcus laughed. "Barely." A loud metallic bang interrupted him. Then silence. The industrial dishwasher stopped. Steam hissed from one side before disappearing altogether. Everyone froze. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then another cook tried pressing the control panel. Nothing. Again, nothing. A maintenance technician rushed over. "What happened?" "The cycle won't restart." "Power?" "No." He crouched beside the machine. "Pump failure." Marcus stared at the growing stacks of dirty plates. "You've got to be kidding." The technician shook his head. "I can't repair this tonight." A heavy silence spread through the room. Nearly 200 guests were still eating. More plates were arriving every minute. Without sanitized dishes, dessert service would collapse. Without clean serving platters, the kitchen couldn't continue plating. Denise burst through the doors. "What's going on?" Marcus answered immediately. "The dishwasher's dead." Her face drained of color. "How long?" the technician answered honestly. "Tomorrow morning if we're lucky." "We don't have tomorrow morning." "No." "We have 40 minutes. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Kelly quietly looked around the room. The 3-compartment utility sinks, the backup sanitizer station, the drying racks stored against the wall, the extra gloves, the portable sprayer. She had worked in older kitchens before industrial machines became standard. Her mother had taught her everything. Kelly stepped forward. "We can still do this." Marcus looked at her. "How?" She pointed calmly. "Hand wash." Someone frowned. "For 200 guests?" "No," Kelly corrected him. "For 200 guests together." She immediately began assigning tasks. "Marcus." "Yeah." "Keep food moving." "Done." "Sophie." "I'm here." "Separate glasses from china." "Okay." "David." The prep cook looked up. "Fill every sanitizer sink." "On it." "Rachel." "Yes." "Clear those storage racks." Without raising her voice, Kelly continued. "We'll create 3 stations. Wash. Sanitize. Dry." Nothing crosses backward. The room, moments earlier, frozen in panic, suddenly found direction. Marcus blinked. "When did you become general?" Kelly smiled faintly. "I didn't." "Then why does everyone keep listening?" She simply picked up an apron. "Because standing still won't clean a single plate." Within minutes, the kitchen transformed. Employees who normally never entered the dish room lined up shoulder to shoulder. Servers rolled up their sleeves. Prep cooks scrubbed trays. Even Denise began stacking racks. Kelly moved constantly, checking temperatures, replacing sanitizer, inspecting every plate before it left. Her calm spread faster than instructions. No shouting, no blame. Only movement. Only purpose. The first cleaned rack rolled back toward the kitchen. Marcus checked it. Spotless. He grinned. "We're back." Not completely, but enough. Back in the ballroom, guests continued eating without the slightest suspicion that the hotel's largest dishwasher had completely failed. A little girl accidentally dropped her dessert fork. Within seconds, another appeared. An elderly couple requested fresh coffee cups. They arrived immediately. Someone complimented the smooth service. No one imagined nearly 20 employees were washing dishes entirely by hand. From the mezzanine overlooking both the ballroom and the service corridor, Eleanor Brooks watched quietly. She had seen crises before. Burst water pipes, power outages, kitchen fires, hurricanes. Every emergency revealed the true character of a team. Tonight revealed something else. Leadership. Not the kind printed on business cards. The kind that appeared when no title existed. She walked downstairs and stopped beside Marcus. "Who's coordinating this?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Kelly? I didn't assign her." "I know." "You approved it." "I didn't need to." Eleanor watched Kelly inspect another rack before sending it toward the kitchen. Every employee seemed to glance at her before making the next decision, not because they had to, because they trusted her. Eleanor smiled, almost imperceptibly. Interesting. Very interesting. Meanwhile, Sophie struggled beside the sanitizer sink. "My hands are killing me." Kelly walked over. "Switch with Rachel for 5 minutes." "I don't want to slow everyone down." "You won't." "I'm okay." Kelly gently took the heavy tray from her hands. "No." She smiled kindly. "You're tired. There's a difference." Sophie looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "I wanted to prove I could keep up." Kelly handed her a bottle of water. "The team moves faster when people admit they're tired." Sophie drank gratefully. "You always notice?" Kelly shrugged. "My mother taught me something." "What now?" "If you're only watching the dishes," she nodded toward the exhausted employees, "you'll miss the people carrying them." Sophie looked around. For the first time, she noticed everyone's faces. Sweat. Red hands, tired shoulders. Marcus rubbing his wrist. David stretching his back. Kelly quietly checking on everyone before herself. She finally understood. Leadership wasn't giving orders. It was seeing people. An hour passed, then another. The emergency system continued working, slower than normal, but steady. The final dinner plates disappeared. Dessert service began only 6 minutes behind schedule. For an event of this size, it was almost miraculous. Denise walked into the dish room looking astonished. "I just checked with ballroom supervisors." Marcus looked up, and they said service was flawless. Someone laughed in disbelief. "Impossible." They had no idea anything happened. A small wave of relieved applause spread through the room. Kelly simply returned to washing another tray. Marcus shook his head. "At least celebrate a little." "We're not finished." "You know," he leaned closer, "if this were any other hotel, we'd all be apologizing to guests." Kelly nodded. "But it isn't." Across the room, Eleanor watched Kelly scrub a roasting pan whose burned edges required far more effort than anyone else wanted to spend. She didn't hand it to someone else. She didn't complain. She simply finished it. Eleanor remembered another woman doing exactly the same thing nearly 30 years earlier. Linda Brooks. Kelly's mother had once stayed 3 extra hours after a banquet because a dishwasher called in sick. No one had asked her. She simply saw what needed doing. Eleanor suddenly understood why Kelly's quiet presence had felt strangely familiar from the moment she first noticed her. It wasn't only the swan napkins. It was the way she carried responsibility without making it look like sacrifice. As dessert plates began returning from the ballroom, the immediate crisis finally eased. Employees exchanged exhausted smiles. Some laughed for the first time all evening. Kelly removed her soaked gloves and flexed her aching fingers. Tiny red marks covered her hands from hours in hot water. Before she could dry them, applause erupted loudly from the ballroom. The newlyweds had apparently finished another toast. Kelly paused for only a moment. She listened to the celebration on the other side of the wall. Then she quietly picked up another stack of plates. The evening wasn't over yet, and neither she sensed was the chapter of her own life that had unexpectedly begun unfolding behind those kitchen doors. The crisis in the kitchen had finally settled into a manageable rhythm, but the night was far from over. At 8:40 p.m., the ballroom was glowing beneath hundreds of tiny lights strung across the ceiling. Guests drifted between the dance floor and dessert stations, laughing over slices of wedding cake and cups of fresh coffee. A jazz trio had given way to a lively band, and every few minutes the room erupted into cheers. Behind the scenes, the staff was running on adrenaline. Kelly had just finished organizing another rack of dessert plates when her phone vibrated inside the pocket of her apron. She almost ignored it. Employees weren't supposed to answer personal calls during service unless it was an emergency. The screen lit up. Dad. Her heartbeat stumbled. She stepped into the narrow hallway beside the employee lockers before answering. Dad? For a moment, all she heard was breathing. Then Harold spoke, his voice strained. I'm sorry, sweetheart. What happened? I dropped the medicine. Kelly closed her eyes. Are you hurt? I don't think so. What do you mean you don't think so? I bent over too quickly. His breathing sounded uneven. My hands wouldn't cooperate. Kelly leaned against the wall. Did you fall? I sat down before I could. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Okay. The pills rolled under the table. I can't reach them. Kelly looked toward the kitchen doors. Dinner service was winding down, but coffee service and cake cutting were still ahead. Stay where you are. I didn't want to bother you. You could never bother me. I know tonight is... He stopped himself. The wedding. Kelly swallowed quietly. I'll come. No. His answer surprised her. You have work. You need your medication. I missed 1 dose. Dad? I'm all right. She wasn't convinced. I'll call George. Our neighbor is probably asleep. It's not even 9. He worked the early shift. Kelly looked down the hallway toward the ballroom. Music drifted faintly through the walls. Her mind raced. If she left now, she would almost certainly lose the weekend attendance bonus, $420, enough to cover nearly a month of Harold's newest prescription, enough to keep worrying at bay, if only for a little while. She hated herself for even thinking about the money. Dad, listen to me. I'm listening. I'm calling George. And if he doesn't answer, I'll drive home. Harold sighed softly. I wish your mother were here. Kelly closed her eyes again. So do I. After ending the call, she immediately dialed George Walker. The retired mail carrier answered on the 3rd ring. Kelly? I'm sorry to call. What's wrong? She explained everything as quickly as she could. George didn't hesitate. I'm putting my shoes on. You don't mind. I've known your father for 30 years. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Thank you. You'd do the same? She almost said always. Instead, she whispered, I owe you. No. George replied warmly. "You owe me nothing." Kelly remained standing in the hallway long after the call ended. For the first time all evening, her composure cracked. Not dramatically, just enough for tears to gather in her eyes. She wiped them away before anyone could see, or so she thought. When she turned around, Eleanor Brooks was standing several feet away. Neither woman spoke immediately. Eleanor's voice remained gentle. "Family emergency." Kelly hesitated. "My father. Is he all right?" "He dropped his medication." "Can you leave?" Kelly glanced toward the kitchen. "I could. But my team can't spare anyone right now." Eleanor studied her face carefully. "You were about to go anyway." "I was trying to decide." "That's not the same thing." Kelly looked down at her hands. "I've spent my whole life choosing between being where I'm needed and being where I'm wanted." The sentence lingered. Eleanor heard something deeper beneath the words. Years of sacrifice. Years of impossible choices. Without another question, she reached into her jacket pocket and handed Kelly her own phone. "Call again." Kelly frowned. "I already spoke to my neighbor." "Call anyway." Confused, Kelly dialed George once more. He answered immediately. "I'm at your front door." Relief flooded her chest. "How's Dad?" He opened the door himself. "Is he okay?" A little shaken. "But he's smiling." Kelly laughed through the tears she had been trying so hard to hide. "Please, stay with him." "I plan to. I'll be home as soon as I finish." "Take your time." Kelly lowered the phone slowly. "Thank you." George chuckled. "You've spent years helping everyone else." "It's about time someone helped you." The line disconnected. Kelly stood silently. Eleanor accepted her phone back. "You have good people in your life." Kelly nodded. "I do." "You must have earned them." Kelly smiled faintly. "I think my father did." They walked together toward the kitchen. Halfway there, Eleanor spoke again. "You know," Kelly looked over, "I've owned this hotel for 26 years." Kelly waited. "I've interviewed graduates from the finest hospitality schools in the country." "I'm sure." They knew spreadsheets, marketing, luxury branding. She paused. "Very few new people." Kelly wasn't sure how to respond. Eleanor continued. "The hardest skill to teach isn't service." "What is it?" "Seeing someone else's burden before they have to ask for help." Kelly lowered her eyes. "My mother used to say almost the same thing." Eleanor looked at her. "I know." Kelly stopped walking. "You knew my mother." "I knew Linda Brooks very well." The hallway suddenly felt smaller. "You remember her?" Eleanor smiled. "Some people leave fingerprints on a building. Your mother left handprints." Before Kelly could ask another question, Denise hurried around the corner. "There you are." She looked relieved. "The cake presentation starts in 2 minutes." Kelly instinctively nodded. "I'm coming." She stepped back into the organized chaos of the kitchen. Servers lifted polished dessert plates. Coffee urns rolled toward the ballroom. Fresh silverware disappeared onto elegant trays. Everything moved once again with quiet precision. Marcus noticed Kelly's expression. "You okay?" She nodded. "George is with Dad." "Good." Marcus squeezed her shoulder briefly. "I wasn't worried about the dishes." "No. I was worried about you." Kelly smiled. "I'll survive." "I know." He looked at her tired face. "I just don't want surviving to become your only goal." His words stayed with her as she returned to work. For years, she had measured success by getting through one more day, one more bill, one more doctor's appointment, one more shift, one more sacrifice. She had almost forgotten that life was supposed to move toward something not simply endure. Across the ballroom, applause erupted again as Robert and Emily cut the wedding cake together. Kelly heard the cheers from behind the kitchen doors, but didn't look. Instead, she carefully placed another folded white swan beside a dessert display. Its wings opened just enough to seem ready for flight. For the first time in many years, she wondered whether she too might still have somewhere else to fly. By 9:30 p.m., the formal schedule of the reception had given way to celebration. The band had traded elegant jazz for classic soul songs that filled the ballroom with laughter and dancing. Children chased each other between tables, while older couples swayed slowly near the edge of the dance floor. The wedding cake had been served, coffee cups were being refilled, and conversations grew warmer as the evening settled into comfort. For the staff, however, there was no pause. Empty glasses continued arriving by the dozens. Dessert plates returned in towering stacks. Every few minutes, another cart rolled through the service doors. Kelly's hands moved with the same quiet rhythm they had maintained all evening. Wash, rinse, inspect, stack, repeat. The ache in her shoulders had become a distant companion she no longer acknowledged. Marcus wheeled in another cart. "Last big push." Kelly smiled. "We've said that 3 times. This one might actually be true. I'll believe it when I see empty sinks," he laughed. "Fair enough." A few minutes later, Denise stepped into the dish room. "The bride wants another tray of champagne flutes." Marcus nodded. "We'll have them ready." Kelly lifted the first rack of polished glasses. "I'll take these." "You sure?" "It's faster." She balanced the tray carefully and pushed through the service corridor toward the ballroom. Unlike earlier in the evening, guests had spread throughout the room. Some stood near the bar. Others gathered around old family photographs displayed beside the entrance. Conversations overlapped into a warm, joyful hum. Kelly kept her eyes on the tray. One step, then another. She reached the beverage station without incident. As she placed the last champagne flute onto the linen-covered table, she heard a familiar voice only a few feet behind her. "Deo, I can't believe you still remember that fishing trip." "Robert." She instinctively straightened, but did not turn around. The voice sounded older than she remembered, softer, less hurried. Someone beside him laughed. Another guest called his name. Kelly took a slow breath. She only needed to return to the kitchen, nothing more. As she turned with the now empty tray, another server accidentally backed into her. "Oh." The tray tilted. Kelly caught it before it hit the floor. The metallic sound echoed louder than expected. Several nearby guests glanced toward her, including Robert. For a brief second, their eyes met across the ballroom. Time did not stop. Movies often lied about moments like this. There was no dramatic music, no slow motion. Only 2 people recognizing a chapter of their lives they had not opened in years. Robert frowned ever so slightly. Not in anger, in uncertainty. His gaze lingered. Kelly saw the instant recognition arrive. His expression changed. The smile disappeared. He took one unconscious step forward. "Kelly." He spoke her name almost under his breath. She heard it. So did no one else. Kelly offered a small, polite nod. Nothing more, no accusation, no tears, no bitterness. Just the simple acknowledgement one human being offers another. Then she continued walking. Behind her, Robert remained standing exactly where he was. Emily approached him carrying 2 coffee cups. "Everything okay?" Robert looked toward the kitchen doors where Kelly had disappeared. "Yeah." His answer came a little too slowly. I thought I recognized someone." Emily followed his gaze, but saw only hotel employees moving efficiently behind the service entrance. "Someone you know?" Robert hesitated. "My ex-wife." Emily blinked. "Here?" "I think so." She looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know she worked at the hotel." "I didn't either." Neither of them spoke for several moments. Emily finally slipped her hand into his. "Do you want to say hello?" Robert looked toward the kitchen again. "No." "Are you sure?" He nodded slowly. This isn't about me tonight." Emily smiled gently. "I appreciate that." But Robert wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the woman who had just looked at him without anger, without pleading, without regret. That somehow hurt more than he expected. Back inside the dish room, Kelly placed the empty tray onto the counter. Marcus immediately noticed her face. "You saw him?" She nodded. "He saw you?" "Yes." Marcus waited. "And?" Kelly rinsed another plate before answering. "Nothing." "Nothing?" "He said my name." "And?" "I kept walking." Marcus studied her carefully. "How do you feel?" Kelly thought about the question longer than she expected. "I always imagined this moment would hurt." "But," she looked down at the warm water flowing over her hands. "It feels quiet." Marcus smiled. "That's different." "It is." She reached for another plate. "I spent years thinking closure came from conversations." "You don't think that anymore?" Kelly shook her head. "Sometimes closure is realizing you no longer need one." The words surprised even her, because they were true. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't trying to be brave. Something inside her had genuinely changed. Not tonight. Not because of the wedding. It had changed little by little through years of caring for Harold, years of honest work, years of learning that dignity didn't depend on who stayed. Marcus leaned against the counter. "You know something." "What?" "I've never met him." "No." "But after hearing about him for years," Kelly interrupted gently. "I haven't talked about Robert for years." Marcus smiled. "Exactly." She looked puzzled. "If someone still owns your heart." He shrugged. "They usually own every conversation, too." Kelly laughed quietly. "I suppose that's true." "But not anymore." "No," she smiled to herself. "Not anymore." Just then, Sophie hurried into the room carrying clean table linens. "You won't believe this." Marcus looked up. "What happened?" "I accidentally folded one of the swans, almost perfectly." Kelly laughed. "Almost." "It still looks a little proud." Kelly took the linen and examined it. The wings were uneven. The neck leaned slightly. But it was beautiful in its own way. She gently adjusted one corner. "There." Sophie admired it. "You fixed it." "No." Kelly handed it back. "You did." "I only reminded it what it wanted to become." Sophie stared at the little swan, then at Kelly. "You really believe everything can become something better, don't you?" Kelly looked toward the closed locker room door at the end of the hallway. Behind it sat the small oak box that had remained untouched all day. She answered almost to herself. "I believe some things need to be released before they can." Without another word, she removed her apron, washed her hands carefully, and glanced once toward the employee lockers. For the first time in nearly 8 years, she knew exactly why she had kept the wedding ring. Not to remember the marriage, not to wait for an apology, not to hold on. She had kept it because one day she would need the chance to let it go on her own terms. And somewhere inside the quiet wooden locker, the small oak box seemed to be waiting patiently for that moment to arrive. The reception had begun to wind down. It was just after 10:15 p.m., and the ballroom carried the comfortable disorder of a celebration that had been fully lived. Half-empty coffee cups rested beside folded place cards. Children had finally grown sleepy, their tiny dress shoes abandoned beneath chairs, while parents gathered jackets and gift bags. The band was playing its final set. Outside the tall windows, Charleston shimmered beneath warm streetlights, and the humid southern night wrapped itself quietly around Magnolia Grand Hotel. Inside the employee corridor, Kelly stood alone in front of her locker. For several seconds, she simply rested her hand on the cool metal door. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't crying. She was breathing. Slowly. Deliberately. Then she turned the combination lock. The familiar click echoed softly through the empty hallway. Inside sat the same belongings she had placed there that morning: her cardigan, her lunchbox, and the small oak box. She lifted it carefully, almost the way someone would carry an old photograph that had survived a fire. The polished wood was smooth from years of being held. She opened it. The wedding ring rested exactly where she had left it. Simple. Gold. Unremarkable to anyone else. Once it had represented promises spoken beneath a summer sky. Later it had represented failure. Tonight, for the first time, it represented neither. It was simply part of her past. Kelly smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to Robert. To the younger version of herself. The woman who had believed in love without hesitation. The woman who had sacrificed willingly. The woman who had never stopped choosing kindness, even when life had become unfair. She gently removed the ring. Next to the oak box lay a freshly pressed white dinner napkin. Kelly unfolded it across the bench. Her fingers began moving almost automatically. One fold, then another. The corners aligned perfectly. The neck curved upward with effortless grace. The wings opened slightly, just as Linda Brooks had always taught her. "Don't fold it too tightly." Her mother's voice seemed to echo inside her memory. "Leave room for people to breathe." Kelly smiled through moist eyes. "I finally understand." The little swan rested in her palms, graceful, peaceful. Its open wings seemed ready to lift from the linen at any moment. She placed the wedding ring carefully inside the center fold where it remained hidden from view. Then she reached into her apron pocket and removed a small notepad used for kitchen inventory. She tore away one clean sheet. For several moments she stared at the blank paper. What could possibly be written after 8 years? She considered dozens of sentences, explanations, questions, memories. None of them felt right. Finally, she wrote only one line. "No debt, no blame. May your future be kinder than our past." She folded the note once and tucked it gently beneath the hidden ring. No signature. None was needed. Anyone who understood would already know. Anyone who didn't, never would. Kelly closed the oak box and returned it to the back of her locker. She would keep the box. Not because it held the ring anymore, because it still held her mother's last gift. She quietly closed the locker door. The hallway seemed strangely lighter, as though she had set down something much heavier than a piece of jewelry. She picked up the linen swan and walked toward the ballroom. The celebration was almost over. Guests had begun gathering near the exit for final photographs. Servers quietly cleared unused centerpieces. Housekeepers waited patiently nearby for the last guest to leave before beginning the overnight reset. Kelly entered unnoticed through the service entrance. She had crossed this room dozens of times that evening. No one paid attention to another employee carrying folded linen. She preferred it that way. Near the center of the ballroom stood Robert and Emily's sweetheart table. Most of the flowers remained untouched. Their champagne glasses still caught the soft glow of candlelight. The chairs were empty. The newlyweds were across the room thanking relatives. Kelly approached slowly. Not because she feared being seen, because she wanted to remember this moment exactly as it happened. She placed the white swan carefully beside Robert's coffee cup. She adjusted one wing slightly. Just enough. Exactly as Linda always had. For a brief second, her fingertips rested on the linen. Then she stepped back. Nothing dramatic had happened. No orchestra swelled. No speech interrupted the music. Only one quiet act of release. As Kelly turned toward the kitchen, she noticed someone standing several yards away. Eleanor Brooks. The elderly owner had witnessed everything. Neither woman spoke. Neither needed to. Eleanor simply watched Kelly leave the table with empty hands. There was no anger in her face, no desperation, only peace. Kelly disappeared once again behind the service doors. Eleanor remained where she was. A few moments later, after the newlyweds moved toward the dance floor for one final song, Eleanor slowly walked to the sweetheart table. Her attention settled on the elegant linen swan. Something about it felt familiar. She reached out carefully. Years of experience told her immediately that something rested inside the folds. Not wanting curious guests to interfere, she gently lifted the swan and carried it toward a quiet corner of the ballroom. There, beneath a reading lamp near the fireplace, she unfolded the wings just enough to reveal a flash of gold, a wedding ring, and a folded note. Eleanor's eyes widened. She unfolded the paper slowly. No debt, no blame. May your future be kinder than our past. She read the sentence twice, then a third time. Her eyes drifted back toward the kitchen doors. Most people, she thought, would have chosen revenge, a public confrontation, a ruined reception, a speech, a scene. Kelly Stewart had chosen something infinitely more difficult. She had chosen grace when bitterness would have been easier. Eleanor carefully refolded the note. She placed the ring back inside the linen swan exactly as she had found it. Then she held the delicate white bird in both hands for a long moment. Suddenly, she wasn't looking at folded fabric anymore. She was looking at Linda Brooks' daughter. Not because of the perfect craftsmanship, but because only someone raised by Linda could leave behind a farewell that asked for nothing, demanded nothing, and wished happiness to the very person who had once broken her heart. Across the ballroom, Robert laughed at something a cousin had said, completely unaware that only a few yards away, the final chapter of his first marriage had just been written, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. And Eleanor Brooks knew with absolute certainty that before this night ended, she needed to speak with Kelly Stewart. By 11:20 p.m., the last wedding guests had finally departed. The ballroom that had shimmered with music and laughter only an hour earlier now rested in a peaceful silence, broken only by the soft rolling of housekeeping carts and the distant hum of vacuum cleaners. Fresh flowers were being carefully removed. Candles were extinguished one by one. White chair covers disappeared into large linen bins. The celebration had ended. The work had not. Kelly pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and helped clear the final serving trays from the ballroom. She worked with the same quiet concentration she had shown all day, never asking whether she could leave early. Marcus noticed. "You've been here almost 18 hours. Kelly smiled. "I stopped counting." "You should go home." "I will. Eventually." She laughed softly. "I always do." Marcus shook his head. "I don't know anyone more stubborn than you. My father disagrees." "Oh, he says I inherited it from my mother." Marcus grinned. "I believe him." As another cart disappeared toward the loading dock, Denise walked into the kitchen carrying her clipboard. "Great job tonight, everyone." Several exhausted employees clapped half-heartedly. The bride's family couldn't stop complimenting the service. Someone joked, "Good, maybe they'll compliment our paychecks next." The room erupted into tired laughter. Even Kelly laughed. The tension that had shadowed the entire evening had begun to dissolve. Just as Kelly removed her apron and reached for her locker key, a calm voice came from the hallway. "Kelly?" She turned. Eleanor Brooks stood near the doorway. Her tailored navy jacket was still immaculate despite the long day, but there was a gentleness in her expression Kelly had never seen before. "If you're not in a hurry," Kelly nodded respectfully. "Of course." Marcus glanced between them. "I'll finish closing." Kelly smiled. "Thank you. You've earned the ride home. I appreciate it." Without another word, Eleanor led Kelly through a quiet side corridor rarely used by guests. They passed old black-and-white photographs hanging along the walls, images of the hotel decades earlier, grand openings, holiday galas, employees gathered around banquet tables, Kelly had walked this hallway many times. Tonight it somehow felt different. They stopped outside a small sitting room overlooking the hotel's courtyard. The lights were low. A single lamp glowed beside an old fireplace. Eleanor motioned toward 2 leather chairs. "Sit." Kelly hesitated. "I should probably change first." "You've earned the right to sit exactly as you are." Kelly smiled politely and took a seat. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Outside crickets sang beneath the magnolia trees. Finally, Eleanor placed something gently on the coffee table between them. The white linen swan. Kelly looked at it quietly. "You found it." "I did. I wasn't trying to disturb the wedding." "I know." Kelly lowered her eyes. "I almost didn't leave it." "What changed your mind?" Kelly considered the question carefully. "For years." She folded her hands together. "I thought letting go meant forgetting." She glanced at the swan. "But forgetting isn't honest." Eleanor listened without interrupting. "I didn't want Robert to feel guilty." "You don't?" Kelly shook her head. "Guilt wouldn't build a better marriage." "What would?" "Peace." The room fell silent again. Eleanor slowly unfolded one wing of the linen swan, just enough to reveal the hidden ring, before closing it once more. "I've seen angry letters." She smiled sadly. "I've seen broken wine glasses. Destroyed cakes. Public arguments. Even someone throwing an engagement ring into the harbor." Kelly remained quiet. "I've never seen someone return a wedding ring with a blessing." Kelly looked toward the courtyard. "My mother always believed people carry enough burdens already." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Yes." She did. Kelly looked back. "You really knew her?" "I knew Linda Brooks better than most people did." Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "When I first bought this hotel, I was terrified." Kelly listened closely. "I understood buildings. I understood business. I did not understand hospitality." She smiled faintly. "Your mother taught me." Kelly blinked. "My mother." Every morning before guests arrived, Linda walked through the ballroom. Eleanor gestured toward the windows. "Not checking flowers. Not checking silverware. Checking people." Kelly frowned slightly. "The staff," Eleanor nodded. She always knew who had been crying. Who hadn't eaten. Whose child was sick. Who was pretending everything was fine. Kelly felt her throat tighten. "That sounds like her." Eleanor smiled. One day I asked how she noticed. "What did she say?" "If you look at tables before people, you'll only run a hotel." She paused. "If you look at people first, they'll take care of the tables." Kelly's eyes filled with tears. "I haven't heard that in years." "I never forgot it." Eleanor stood and walked toward a bookshelf in the corner. From the top shelf, she removed an old leather photo album. She placed it gently beside the linen swan. "I've kept this for a long time." Kelly opened the cover carefully. Inside were photographs taken decades earlier. Holiday banquets, employee celebrations, Christmas dinners. Then she found one that stole her breath. A much younger Linda Brooks stood in the ballroom wearing a crisp white uniform, laughing while folding linen beside several co-workers. She looked exactly as Kelly remembered. Bright eyes, gentle smile, confident hands. Kelly reached out and lightly touched the photograph. "I've never seen this." "There aren't many copies." Eleanor sat back down. "Your mother refused promotions 3 different times." Kelly looked up in surprise. "I didn't know that." "I offered them." "She always said no." "Why?" "Because Harold was working nights." "Because you needed rides to school." "Because family dinners mattered more to her than office titles." Kelly stared silently at the photograph. So many people assumed Linda lacked ambition. Eleanor smiled. They misunderstood. She knew exactly what success meant to her. The words settled deeply inside Kelly. For years she had quietly worried that her own life looked ordinary, that she had somehow fallen behind. Yet hearing her mother's story through someone else's eyes changed everything. Perhaps sacrifice had never been failure. Perhaps love performed consistently was its own achievement. Eleanor gently closed the album. "I watched you tonight." Kelly looked embarrassed. "I was only doing my job." "No." Eleanor shook her head. "You were doing far more than that." She rested one hand on the linen swan. "When the dishwasher failed, when guests became impatient, when your father needed you, you never stopped seeing other people." Kelly lowered her eyes. "My mother taught me." "I know," Eleanor smiled warmly. "And I believe she finished teaching you exactly what I spent years hoping someone would learn." Kelly looked at her, uncertain what she meant. Eleanor didn't explain. Not yet. Instead, she carefully lifted the linen swan and slid it back across the table toward Kelly. "I think this belongs with you for one more conversation." Kelly accepted it gently, unaware that Eleanor had already made a decision, one that had nothing to do with sympathy, and everything to do with the extraordinary leader she believed had been quietly hiding behind the dish room doors all these years. Kelly left the sitting room just after midnight, carrying the linen swan in one hand and the old photo album tucked carefully beneath her arm. Eleanor had insisted she borrow it for a few days. "There are some memories," she had said with a gentle smile, "that deserve to go home." The hotel was almost silent now. Only the overnight maintenance crew remained replacing light bulbs and resetting banquet rooms for the next day's conference. Kelly stopped briefly in the employee locker room. She opened the small oak box once more. The ring was no longer inside. She looked at the empty velvet lining for several quiet seconds. Oddly enough, it didn't feel empty. It felt finished. She placed the folded linen swan inside instead. Then she closed the lid. When she stepped outside, the warm Charleston air wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. The streets were nearly deserted. Her old Chevrolet started on the second try. She smiled. "You're getting stubborn in your old age." The dashboard rattled as she drove home beneath rows of ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss. For the first time in years, the silence inside the car didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. George Walker was sitting on the front porch when she arrived. The retired mail carrier stood as her headlights swept across the yard. "Long day," Kelly smiled gratefully. "You stayed." George shrugged. "Your father made me watch 3 old baseball games." Kelly laughed. "That sounds like him. He also beat me twice at checkers." "Definitely sounds like him." George handed her the spare house key. "He's asleep." "Did he take his medicine?" "Every pill." Kelly's shoulders relaxed. "I don't know how to thank you." George adjusted his cap. "You already have." "When?" "Every time you've checked on my wife after her surgery." Kelly looked down. "I never kept score." "Exactly." He smiled warmly before walking toward his own house. "Good night, Kelly." "Good night." Inside the house was dark, except for the small lamp glowing beside Harold's favorite chair. Kelly quietly covered him with a blanket that had slipped to the floor. Even asleep, his hands trembled slightly. She gently rested one hand over his. "I'm home." He didn't wake, but his breathing seemed to settle. The next morning arrived far later than usual. Kelly opened her eyes at nearly 9. For someone who normally woke before dawn, it felt almost shocking. She wandered into the kitchen wearing an oversized sweatshirt. Harold was already making coffee, or at least trying to. "I thought I told you not to lift that kettle." "I was being rebellious." Kelly hurried over. "I can see that." She took the kettle from his shaking hands. I survived another year. You survived one night. He smiled. Details. They shared breakfast in comfortable silence. After several minutes, Harold noticed the photo album resting on the table. What's this? Kelly opened it carefully. Eleanor loaned it to me. He adjusted his glasses. The moment he saw Linda's photograph, his expression softened. Oh. He reached toward the page with trembling fingers. I haven't seen this picture. Neither had I. Harold smiled through moist eyes. Your mother loved this hotel. I know. No. He looked at Kelly. I don't think you ever really knew. Kelly listened quietly. When you were little, Harold chuckled softly. She'd come home talking about guests she'd met. The little girl afraid to be Flower Girl. The widower eating Thanksgiving dinner alone. The young dishwasher learning English. She remembered every name. Kelly looked again at the photograph. I always thought she just worked there. Harold shook his head. She believed hospitality wasn't serving food. What was it? Helping strangers feel less alone. The words settled deep inside Kelly. Later that afternoon, her phone rang. The caller ID read Eleanor Brooks. Kelly answered immediately. Good afternoon? I hope I didn't wake you. You didn't. I was wondering if you might stop by the hotel tomorrow morning. Kelly frowned slightly. Did something happen? Not exactly. Eleanor's tone remained calm. I'd simply like to talk. Of course. 10 o'clock. I'll be there. The following morning, Kelly arrived wearing her usual work uniform. She expected another ordinary shift. Instead, Denise greeted her in the employee hallway. Eleanor's waiting upstairs. Kelly looked confused. Before I clock in? She specifically asked. Kelly made her way to the executive offices she had rarely visited. The hallway felt strangely unfamiliar. Large framed photographs lined the walls. Awards, historic renovations, community events. Everything seemed far removed from the noisy dish room where she spent most of her days. Eleanor welcomed her inside. Coffee. Thank you. They sat near a wide window overlooking the hotel's gardens. For several moments, Eleanor simply watched employees crossing the courtyard below. Finally, she spoke. Do you know why I asked you here? Kelly smiled politely. I assumed it was about the wedding. It is. But not because of the ring. Kelly waited. I've spent the last 3 years searching. For what? My successor? Kelly blinked. You mean someone to eventually oversee hotel operations? Kelly almost laughed. I think you've called the wrong employee. I don't. Eleanor folded her hands. I've interviewed people with master's degrees. Luxury resort experience. International management certifications? She paused. They impressed me. But none convinced me. Kelly looked genuinely puzzled. I'm a dishwasher. No, Eleanor corrected gently. That's your position. It isn't who you are. Kelly didn't know what to say. Eleanor continued. I watched you organize an entire kitchen without authority. I watched people trust you. I watched you choose grace when bitterness would have been easier. She leaned forward slightly. Those things cannot be taught in classrooms. Kelly looked out the window. I don't have the education. You can earn knowledge. I don't have management experience. You've been managing people for years. I've never supervised anyone. Eleanor smiled. You supervised an entire emergency Saturday night. Kelly fell silent. The room remained quiet long enough for the clock on the wall to become noticeable. Finally, Eleanor reached into a folder lying beside her. Inside was a brochure. Magnolia Grand Leadership Development Program. 1-year paid management apprenticeship. Tuition fully covered. Kelly stared at it. I can't afford school. You won't need to. I still have my father. I know. The schedule is designed around full-time employees. Kelly slowly closed the brochure. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why me? Eleanor answered without hesitation. Because your mother taught people how to welcome guests. She smiled warmly. You've learned how to welcome life. Kelly lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of the opportunity resting in her hands. For the first time in many years, the future before her looked larger than the next paycheck or the next doctor's appointment. But accepting it would require something even more difficult than hard work. It would require believing that she deserved a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. Kelly carried the leadership program brochure home without opening it again. It rested on the passenger seat during the drive, occasionally sliding against the old leather whenever she turned a corner. More than once she glanced at it, then looked back at the road. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the brochure still looked untouched. Harold was watering the tomato plants with one hand while steadying the hose with the other. You shouldn't be lifting that. He smiled without turning around. I figured you'd say that. You figured correctly. She took the hose from him. The two worked quietly for several minutes, watering the small garden Linda had planted years before. Finally, Harold noticed the folded brochure tucked beneath Kelly's arm. Something from work. Kelly nodded. I need your opinion. Inside the kitchen, she spread the brochure across the table. Harold adjusted his reading glasses. He read every page carefully. Twice. When he finally looked up, Kelly expected practical questions. Instead, he asked only one. What's stopping you? Kelly looked down at her coffee cup. A lot of things. Name one. I've never been to college. So, the people in this program probably have degrees. Probably. They'll know things I don't. Harold smiled gently. They might. Kelly sighed. I've spent years washing dishes. And I don't belong in executive meetings. Harold leaned back in his chair. When you were 8 years old. Kelly smiled faintly. Here we go. You wanted to play piano. I remember. You quit after 3 lessons. I thought everyone else played better. Harold nodded. Your mother told you something. Kelly looked toward the window. I remember. What was it? She answered quietly. You don't walk into a room already belonging there. You belong because you keep showing up. Harold smiled. Exactly. Kelly remained silent. Her father reached across the table and gently placed his weathered hand over hers. For 15 years. You've built your life around taking care of me. Dad, he shook his head. Listen. I've been proud of your sacrifices. His voice became softer. But I don't want them becoming your identity. Kelly felt her throat tighten. I don't regret any of it. I know. And neither do I. He smiled warmly. But your mother and I didn't raise you to spend your whole life standing behind someone else's success. The words stayed with Kelly long after breakfast ended. The following Monday marked the first day of the apprenticeship. Instead of reporting directly to the dish room, Kelly received a different schedule. Front desk observation, housekeeping logistics, inventory management, guest relations, banquet operations, finance meetings. Every department, everything she had never imagined seeing. Some employees congratulated her. Others looked confused. A few whispered that Eleanor was showing favoritism. Kelly heard the rumors. She answered none of them. On her first morning at the front desk, a young concierge named Nathan handed her a thick operations manual. This should help. Kelly accepted it gratefully. It's bigger than my dictionary. Nathan laughed. It feels like that. By lunchtime, she had filled pages of handwritten notes, reservation systems, emergency procedures, VIP protocols, vendor contracts, words she had never encountered before, RevPAR, ADR, occupancy forecasting. Some of it felt like another language. That evening, she sat beside Harold, reviewing the material. I don't understand half of this. Harold looked over the pages. I don't either. They both laughed. But you'll learn. I hope so. Every night after work, Kelly studied for hours. Sometimes she fell asleep with highlighters still in her hands. Sometimes she woke before dawn to review financial reports before making breakfast. The days became longer than ever. Yet somehow they also became lighter. Marcus noticed the change first. One afternoon, he found Kelly sitting alone in the employee cafeteria reading a leadership book. Homework. She smiled. Feels like it. He sat across from her. How's management life? I've never been so confused. That's encouraging, she laughed. It is. If you think you already know everything, Marcus shrugged. That's when people stop growing. Kelly closed the book. I keep making mistakes. So, I accidentally scheduled 2 deliveries for the same loading dock yesterday. What happened? Eleanor asked how I planned to fix it. And I apologized. Marcus grinned. Wrong answer. Kelly nodded. She said the same thing. What did she want? A solution. Kelly smiled. So I reorganized both deliveries and asked the vendors to split their arrival times. Marcus leaned back proudly. There you go. I still made the mistake. But you owned it. That afternoon, Eleanor invited Kelly to observe a meeting with department supervisors. Around the polished conference table sat experienced managers discussing labor costs and seasonal marketing strategies. Kelly felt completely out of place. She spoke only once during the entire meeting. Near the end, the food and beverage director complained about high turnover among banquet staff. We keep losing good employees. Everyone offered suggestions. Higher bonuses, better recruiting, advertising. Kelly hesitated. Eleanor noticed. You have a thought. Every face turned toward her. Kelly took a careful breath. I don't know if this is useful. Go ahead. She folded her hands. When people leave, she looked around the room. Have we asked why they stayed as long as they did? Silence. The managers exchanged puzzled looks. Kelly continued. If we understand what made them stay, we'll probably understand what made them leave. The room remained quiet. Finally, the human resources director slowly nodded. We've never asked that. Eleanor smiled almost imperceptibly. Perhaps we should. After the meeting ended, Kelly apologized. I hope I didn't speak out of turn. Eleanor looked genuinely surprised. You spoke exactly when you should have. I wasn't sure. Most people in leadership rush to answer. She smiled. You listened first. Weeks turned into months. Kelly rotated through every department. She learned budgeting from the accounting team, negotiation from purchasing, conflict resolution from guest services. She still spent 1 shift each week in the dish room by choice. Sophie noticed immediately. You don't have to come back here. Kelly smiled while tying on her familiar apron. I know. Then why? Kelly looked around the busy kitchen. Because I never want to forget what this place feels like. Sophie hugged her impulsively. I missed working with you. I missed all of you too. Marcus overheard and laughed. Don't get sentimental. Kelly picked up a stack of plates. I'll always belong here. Marcus shook his head. No. He smiled proudly. You started here. That's different. As Kelly stepped back into the familiar rhythm of the dish room, she realized something had quietly changed. Months earlier, she had believed leadership meant leaving this place behind. Now she understood something Eleanor had been trying to teach her all along. Real leaders didn't rise by forgetting where they started. They rose by making sure no one working beside them ever felt invisible again. Almost 18 months after Robert Stewart's wedding, Magnolia Grand Hotel looked much the same from the outside. Tourists still stopped to photograph the historic brick facade. Wedding parties still gathered beneath the sprawling magnolia trees in the courtyard. The scent of fresh flowers and polished wood still greeted guests the moment they stepped through the revolving doors. Inside, however, many things had quietly changed. One of those changes now walked confidently through the lobby each morning, carrying a leather portfolio instead of a dish rack. Kelly Stewart had officially become operations manager. The title still felt unfamiliar whenever she saw it printed beneath her name. She hadn't asked for a larger office. She hadn't replaced her old Chevrolet. She still packed lunch in the faded blue lunchbox Harold insisted was too lucky to throw away. Some habits were worth keeping. At 8:00 a.m., Kelly began every day the same way. Not with emails, not with financial reports. She walked the entire property. She greeted the overnight security guard before he clocked out. She thanked the housekeeping staff, finishing early rooms. She stopped in the kitchen to taste the breakfast potatoes. She visited the dish room every morning, even when she had no reason to be there. The first time she returned, wearing a Navy management blazer, the entire dish crew grew strangely quiet. Marcus looked up from the prep sink. "Well?" Kelly smiled. "What? You still know where this room is?" "I'd be worried if I didn't." One of the younger dishwashers laughed. "We thought managers forgot this place existed." Kelly picked up a clean towel and began drying a stack of serving bowls beside them. "Then somebody taught management the wrong lesson." Marcus folded his arms. "You know this isn't in your job description." Kelly looked around the room. "It should be." The employees exchanged amused smiles. Within minutes, the conversation returned to normal. That was exactly how Kelly wanted it. No distance, no performance. Just work done together. Later that week, Magnolia Grand hosted the annual Southeastern Hospitality Leadership Conference. Hotel owners, investors, and executives from across the region filled every meeting room. Kelly spent weeks preparing the event. Everything ran exactly on schedule. At noon, she stood near the ballroom entrance, reviewing catering logistics with Marcus. "You've checked that list 4 times. Kelly smiled. 5. You trust anyone besides yourself? I trust you. I was fishing for compliments. You caught one. Before Marcus could answer, a familiar voice floated across the lobby. Excuse me. Kelly turned instinctively. Robert Stewart stood near the registration desk wearing a charcoal business suit and conference badge. He wasn't attending as a wedding guest this time. He represented a commercial real estate development company presenting at the conference. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Robert was the first to recover. Kelly? His voice carried genuine surprise. I had no idea. He glanced toward the name badge clipped neatly to her blazer. Kelly Stewart, operations manager. His eyes returned to hers. Congratulations. Kelly smiled warmly. Thank you. He looked around the elegant lobby. I've been coming here for business meetings. I never imagined... She finished the sentence for him. That I'd still be here. Robert looked embarrassed. I didn't mean it like that. I know. There was no bitterness in her voice, only kindness, the kind that came from someone who had already made peace with yesterday. Robert glanced toward the bustling staff. They seem to respect you. Kelly looked toward Sophie, now supervising banquet setup with quiet confidence. Marcus was laughing with 2 new employees near the kitchen doors. They respect each other. I just try to help. Robert smiled faintly. You always did. A brief silence settled between them. Finally, Robert spoke again. I've wanted to say something for a long time. Kelly waited patiently. I'm sorry. He looked directly into her eyes. Not because my life moved forward. He took a slow breath. But because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing everything you were carrying. Kelly didn't answer immediately. She considered his words carefully. Then she smiled. I used to think I needed that apology. Robert looked hopeful. And now? She glanced toward the conference ballroom where dozens of employees moved confidently through their responsibilities. Now I'm just glad you finally understand. There was no accusation hidden inside the sentence, only truth. Robert nodded slowly. I found the note. Kelly looked surprised. Eleanor gave it to us after the reception. His voice became softer. I've carried it in my desk ever since. Kelly hadn't expected that. I read it every few months. Why? To remind myself what grace looks like. For a moment, neither spoke. The years between them no longer felt heavy, only distant. Emily appeared from the registration area carrying 2 conference folders. She smiled politely. Hi? Kelly returned the smile. It's nice to see you again. Emily's warmth felt completely genuine. I've heard wonderful things about what you've done here. Kelly laughed softly. I've been lucky. Emily shook her head. I don't think luck trains people to smile the way your staff does. Kelly glanced toward Sophie, who was helping a nervous new banquet server straighten his tie before guests arrived. Kindness spreads faster than instructions. Emily smiled. I believe that. Robert looked from Kelly to the busy hotel around them. You built something remarkable. Kelly shook her head gently. No. She looked toward the kitchen. We built it. Just then, a young housekeeper hurried into the lobby, looking anxious. Miss Stewart, Kelly turned immediately. What's wrong? The Henderson family arrived early. The grandmother uses a wheelchair. Our accessible room isn't ready. Kelly nodded once. Give me 5 minutes. She looked back toward Robert. I'm sorry, he smiled. Don't be. You've got people waiting. Kelly extended her hand. It was good seeing you. Robert accepted it. You too. As they shook hands, neither felt the weight of the past anymore. Only quiet gratitude that 2 imperfect people had eventually found different paths toward becoming better versions of themselves. Kelly walked away without looking back. Robert watched her cross the lobby. Every employee she passed smiled naturally. Some asked questions. Others simply nodded. She knew every name. She noticed every worried expression. She paused to help a bellman lift heavy luggage before continuing toward the elevators with the Henderson family. Emily slipped her arm through Robert's. You okay? He smiled. I am now. What are you thinking? Robert watched the lobby a moment longer. I spent years believing success meant climbing higher. He looked toward Kelly helping the elderly grandmother into the elevator. I never realized it also meant helping other people climb with you. Across the lobby, Kelly smiled as the grandmother squeezed her hand in thanks. She never noticed Robert and Emily quietly walking toward the conference ballroom. She had already turned her attention to the next person who needed her. And somehow that simple habit had become the greatest success of her life. 3 years later, the ballroom at Magnolia Grand Hotel looked different from any wedding Kelly Stewart had ever prepared. There were no floral arches, no towering wedding cake, no dance floor waiting beneath sparkling lights. Instead, rows of neatly arranged chairs faced a simple wooden stage, decorated with white magnolias and folded linen swans. A banner stretched across the back wall, Magnolia Hospitality Fellowship. Celebrating new beginnings, nearly 60 people filled the room. Some were graduates, some were hotel employees. Some were family members who had spent years watching loved ones work long hours in kitchens, laundry rooms, housekeeping departments, and dish stations that guests rarely noticed. Harold Stewart sat proudly in the front row. His hair had grown almost completely white. His hand still trembled, but more gently than before. George Walker sat beside him, already teasing that Harold would probably cry before the ceremony ended. "I won't," George laughed. "You cried during the rehearsal." "That was different. It was exactly the same." Harold smiled. "I had something in my eye." "Sure you did." Both men laughed quietly. Backstage, Kelly adjusted the microphone one final time. She still wore a navy blazer, but today she had pinned a small silver swan to the lapel. Eleanor Brooks walked toward her carrying a familiar wooden box. "I thought this belonged here." Kelly immediately recognized it. The little oak box. Her mother's gift. "I've kept it in my office ever since you completed the fellowship." Kelly accepted it carefully. "It reminds me where everything began." Eleanor smiled. "No. It reminds you why." Kelly opened the box. Inside rested a perfectly folded white linen swan. Nothing else. No ring, no note. Only the symbol that had quietly carried one chapter of her life into another. She gently closed the lid. Guests settled into their seats as soft piano music filled the ballroom. Marcus Reed approached, wearing a dark suit instead of his usual chef's jacket. "I've got good news." Kelly smiled. "What now?" "The newest restaurant opening downtown wants to hire 4 graduates." "Already?" "They called this morning." Kelly laughed. "I haven't even handed out certificates yet." Marcus grinned. "They've been watching your trainees during internships." Kelly looked toward the audience. Every graduate represented a different story. A single mother rebuilding after domestic violence, a military veteran struggling to find work, a former dishwasher learning event management, a young man who had aged out of foster care. They weren't receiving charity. They had earned opportunity. That distinction mattered deeply to Kelly. The ceremony began with a short welcome from Eleanor. She stood behind the podium only briefly. "I've spent more than 4 decades in hospitality." Her eyes wandered across the audience. "I once believed beautiful buildings created unforgettable hotels." She smiled toward Kelly. "I was wrong." She paused. "People create unforgettable places." The room filled with warm applause. Then Eleanor stepped aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," she smiled proudly, "our operations director, Kelly Stewart." The applause grew louder. Kelly walked onto the stage carrying the small oak box. She looked across the room before speaking. "For many years," her voice remained calm, "I believed the most important people in a hotel were the ones guests remembered." She glanced toward the housekeeping team sitting together near the back. "I couldn't have been more mistaken." A few employees smiled knowingly. The people who quietly prepare breakfast before sunrise. The housekeepers who leave handwritten notes for nervous brides. The maintenance technicians who fix problems before anyone notices. The dishwashers who polish every plate. She smiled gently. "They're the reason guests remember how a place made them feel." Silence settled across the ballroom. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Kelly opened the oak box. She carefully removed the folded linen swan. Many graduates leaned forward curiously. "My mother taught me to fold these." She held it high enough for everyone to see. "When I was little, I thought this was about making tables beautiful." A warm smile crossed her face. "It isn't." She slowly opened the wings. "It's about reminding ourselves that every person who walks through our doors deserves to feel welcome." She looked toward the graduates. "And every person wearing a uniform deserves exactly the same." Several people quietly wiped away tears. Kelly invited the graduates onto the stage one by one. Instead of placing only a certificate in each person's hands, she also gave them a folded white swan. When Sophie Miller's turn came to help present the awards, she smiled at Kelly. "You still fix my swan sometimes." Kelly laughed softly. Only when you ask. Sophie leaned closer. I don't anymore. You taught me how. Kelly squeezed her hand. You figured it out yourself. At the end of the ceremony, a young graduate named Jasmine approached Kelly, holding her linen swan carefully. I have a question. Of course. What if I mess everything up? Kelly smiled because she recognized the fear immediately. I've made more mistakes than you can imagine. Really? More than I admit. Jasmine laughed nervously. Then how do you keep going? Kelly gently adjusted one wing of Jasmine's swan. My mother used to tell me... She paused. Don't fold it too tightly. Jasmine looked confused. Kelly smiled. Leave room to grow. The young woman nodded slowly. I think I understand. I think you will. Later that afternoon, after the guests had gone home, and the ballroom had grown quiet once again, Kelly walked alone between the empty rows of chairs. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows exactly as it had on Robert and Emily's wedding day years before. She paused beside one of the tables. Without thinking, she straightened a slightly crooked linen swan. Then she smiled. Some habits never disappeared. They simply found new meaning. Through the open ballroom doors, she noticed Jasmine preparing for her very first shift as a banquet assistant. A nervous family with 2 small children entered the lobby. Before anyone asked for help, Jasmine hurried forward with a warm smile. Welcome to Magnolia Grand. She bent down to speak gently with the children before leading the family toward the front desk. Kelly watched quietly from a distance. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The kindness that had once begun with Linda Brooks had passed to Kelly. From Kelly, it had reached countless others. Like ripples spreading across still water, it would continue traveling long after any one person's story had ended. Somewhere Kelly imagined her mother would have smiled. Not because her daughter had become a director, not because she had earned respect, but because she had remembered the lesson hidden inside a simple folded swan. Real hospitality was never about luxury. It was about reminding another human being that they mattered. Life has a quiet way of testing what kind of person we choose to become. Sometimes those tests arrive through heartbreak, disappointment, or seasons when it feels as though everyone else is moving forward while we're simply trying to survive. Kelly's journey reminds us that dignity isn't measured by a job title, a paycheck, or the opinions of people who failed to see our worth. It is measured by the kindness we continue to offer when life gives us every reason to become bitter. Forgiveness does not erase the past, and it does not pretend that pain never happened. Instead, it frees us from carrying yesterday into every tomorrow. The greatest victories often begin long before anyone applauds them, in the quiet moments when we choose responsibility over resentment, compassion over pride, and hope over despair. Perhaps someone has overlooked your efforts. Perhaps your work feels invisible. Remember that character is built in places where few people are watching, and those unseen choices often prepare us for opportunities we never expected. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. Your story may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If you enjoy stories about courage, second chances, and the quiet power of kindness, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next journey.